recording now. So if you're listening in, today is our profiling stream call. It's the last one in July. The two topics that I have, or I should say, yeah, it's really two topics on the agenda today. And one is to go through kind of any of the outstanding questions around that have come out of QA in terms of profiling improvements, error corrections, honing in, I think, on two that we have in the observation space. So there's one observation general results that is currently flagging an error that we have to make a decision on. And one decision that we kind of started a discussion last week on the smoking status profile that will kind of review what was discussed and determine whether or not we want to move forward with what was proposed. And then the second piece, I would say, is like less technical in nature, but as we prepare for the 1.2 and 2.0 updates, one of the things that we've always said, we wanted to get in place, especially now that we have a lot more community editors that have been raising their hands and helping us get issues resolved and applied, is like a community contributors page. And so I've got a topic on the agenda for that to just talk through, does the approach make sense? Is this how we want to do it? How do we solicit, additional folks that, we might be missing from the list to make sure that, we're thinking about this comprehensively and historically. So those were the kind of 2 or 3 items that I have on the profiling call for today. Are there other things that we want to add on the agenda that are kind of profiling oriented, or, is there interest if we have time in applying, I think, the change that came out of 2 weeks ago, the session together? I think it was just relaxing some of the slicing constraints that were present on one of our other observation profiles. Folks happy with this agenda? We want to add anything else to it? All right. I'll just note that, like all of the rest of our recordings, if you are interested in re-reviewing where we are or covering one of the technical profiling topics that we've gone through in the past, maybe you are curious about invariance or bake or any of the processes that we often will utilize during our profiling calls when we're making live edits. You can find that on our YouTube channel. We've got a playlist. I'll just put it here. And we have our governance and our profiling ones, but I know I certainly have gone back to that bake session that we've had a few times when I have wanting to make sure that I am configuring my files correctly. So it's a good resource. Just a reminder, so like we've been kind of framing the changes that we're making to the profiles in the context of trying to get our 1.2 update out. So our goal being resolve any kind of breaking errors, any of the major problems. We've got a lot of problems that we've been working on that have been invariant focused, but like with this drive to ultimately get the baseline to a place where we can say, yep, here's our major update, here are the profiles and where they sit, before we prepare for 2.0, which will be a larger shift, I think, particularly in terms of the canonical URL and some of the finer detail cleanup. So the last time that you guys looked at, I think, some of the remaining invariant QA errors, Mike was walking through some of the ones that were revolved around, I want to say it was observation. No, it was allergy intolerance. Okay. And we haven't applied this yet. We could apply it on the call today, but there were a few others that kind of are in a similar boat that I can talk through before we kind of make up our minds about it. I'm going to start with this one before we go into the second one, because I'm thinking the second one might have a little bit more discussion around it. So effectively, when we are looking at our CA baseline, we're looking at the guide, we have, and I'm actually just going to show you guys like how I got here. So say you're looking at the baseline guide at any point in time, and as part of this kind of QA and trying to find, okay, what are the really problematic errors that we have? You can go down, some of them are like ones that are known and that repeat over and over and over again. They might be like having to do with non-resolvable terminology. We know those, but some of them have to do with invariance. And so we've been kind of making our way down the list and focusing on any errors. We've seen a pattern in place where a lot of times like invariant errors will occur particularly given like where they are applied. So one pattern that IG Publisher didn't previously flag, but is flagging now, and that's because it becomes more intelligent over time, not because the rules have changed, was that we've applied invariants that effectively, when they're supposed to target two distinct things, we apply them at a level that that only targets one of them. So rather than applying it at like the next level up, where potentially like both elements could be housed under, in a lot of places, we've kind of targeted and applied the invariant on one, typically only one of the potential targets. And I'll show you how this one shows up for observation results. So we've got basically this invariant that's saying, well, you're saying, we want to see that the value codable concept that the system is empty or the system is equal to SCTC or SCT. So this is SNOMED CT. But the IG Publisher is unhappy because this first place value codable concept isn't what it expected in like the path, because it wasn't expecting it for where it was applied. So if we actually look at the JSON, what we can do is like take a look at and validate that that is the actual problem. And then I'm going to circle back to like what I think is the higher level problem on this that contributes to having to have an invariant and the discussion about whether or not we want one in this case. So I think the one we're looking at is results 1 and 2. You can see they follow a very similar kind of pattern. And we can see we've applied this warning, and it's basically saying, hey, we want you, if you're going to be providing a observation that is intended to convey some generic form of results, we want you to be providing it using SNOMED CT if you're supplying coded results. Meaning, if you're going to give me a result that is a codable concept, we really want your system to be SNOMED CT. And then there is another one that's very similar that says, if you supply it to us as a quantity, well, we really want you to use UCOM, right? And for some reason, I guess that the SNOMED CT one is a warning and this one is an error, which I guess kind of makes sense because a lot of other result profiles do say, hey, if you're providing quantity, we do expect UCOM. But the underlying, like the reason it flagged in the first place, I'm actually going to go this in the differential view. It's easier to see there. Let's see, here it is because we applied the invariant here on the actual slice for value quantity system. So even though we were saying, oh, target system, we kind of applied it in like a place that it could really only look at system, even though we're saying, hey, the invariant like expression should be checking like system and value. And so that is what's driving the ultimate error. And it's something that, we could resolve quickly the same way that we've done with some of our other observation issues and our allergy intolerance issues that we've resolved by just kind of bringing up this to a much higher level. So we probably bring it up to value, or we bring it up to like value quantity here. And the other one would come up to the slice for value codable concept. But the underlying question, as I was thinking through like the statements that we made in the past, which is like, if this comes up in other places, can we automatically deploy, make the same type of change, was, do we want to make the same type of change, or like, is some of this a little bit over modeled for what we're actually intending to do? And so when we look at the actual profile right now, we can see that we've got this invariant that we talked about, results 1 and results 2, that are applied on value codable concept and value quantity, but that ultimately we also have this intersection where we're also fixing the system. So we're saying like, hey, this should be an error, but right below it, we're also saying like, this is fixed. So like beyond this being invalid, like you can't send anything other than UCOM here. And so like, even if we were to migrate this invariant upwards and upwards, it's kind of like deploying two hard mechanical constraints that do the exact same thing. It's kind of duplicative, right? And so I wanted to bring it forward to the profiling stream because I think there's an outstanding question of like, do we want to duplicate this? Does it provide value? Does it create complexity? And do we like one of the constraints over the other, fixing it versus putting the invariant in place? So I am going to open the floor for questions and discussion. Like, does the framing that I put forward in terms of like the choice that we have make sense?
Yes. My main question was going to be the same question I've asked before on these. Stepping back about what we really want to say, can we say it more succinctly with bindings and fixed values rather than trying to do sliced invariants? Because that's always easier to interpret and understand, right?
Yep. Especially now that like we've spent so many sessions dedicated to like cleaning up slicing and invariants. It just tends to be this thing that like continues to challenge, I think, with over complexity in the project.
Yeah, so for instance, around the use of UCOM, I don't know what our binding strength is for value quantity for UCOM. I suppose it's still on the slice because it's still a value is still a polymorphic type, but we want to say that the binding for value quantity units are UCOM. That's what we're trying to say, right?
Yeah, and that like I think the desire, if we're looking at the text for this one, is like for it to be almost non-negotiable. So like a required binding.
Which is, that's a separate question of whether that's too strong or not, but that's what we're trying to say. I think doing it there says that without even the invariant.
Fixing the value, you mean, or yeah, I mean, effectively, like both of like if you remove this, the same would still be true, which would be to say if you provide something outside of units of measure for your system, it's considered invalid. Is anyone, well, I should say before, because I think, Lorraine, to your point, like there's a separate conversation which is around like, ooh, is this too strong? But before we talk about that, like, does anyone think that we get value from having both of these here? And would argue for like keeping both as opposed to figuring out, do we try to make this less complex?
Vinny here. I don't think we need to have two things doing the same thing because it could easily get out of sync again if someone changes one and not the other.
Do you have one that you like better than the other in terms of, or one a way that we could express this that would be different than what we've looked at?
So I was just reading about profiling in terms of our profiles allowed to put fixed values. Somehow I think I've read somewhere that attributes that are set by base should not have fixed values.
You mean set by the base resource?
Right.
Lorraine, I don't know if that's a rule in the FHIR spec, but it makes sense and it's in alignment with what we often see, which is to say that like usually like there's a slimmer set of options if the base resource is going to be really prescriptive, but the way that most data types are set up is that like you express what
If
you
I
need
can
within
get
them.
if I can find the link to that.
There isn't a ton of other places like going beyond the base. So yes, we can, from a profiling perspective, adding a fixed value is a legitimate modification that you can make in the profile via elements, right? So if we're looking at element definition, and I highly recommend everybody print this out and put it on their desk because I use it all the time. It's just easier to actually have when you're trying to like look up what levers you have to pull. But within element definition, right, we for any given element, or I should say for eligible elements, we can apply things like fixed or pattern, which allows for us to profile in some of those rules.
Right. So that fixed value there, does it turn into a pattern? The profile is actually a fixed value.
So within this one, it's fixed, meaning like it's when when an instance is sent and an instance says, oh, I'm conformant to the baseline, and that instance is evaluated against the baseline profile, it's just going to perform a check that will say, if its value quantity is system this, yes, no, as opposed to like a pattern, which might say, this combination of system value or system unit, or this expression, often combination is present, which is like if we were looking at something that was going to be a little bit, for example, that would require more than one fixed content or content data piece here, or if we wanted it to be like, if it fits this particular pattern, that's when we'd be using pattern over fixed. I think for this one, because it's only saying we care about UCOM and it's applying it in value quantity, we probably don't need a pattern. The only reason I can see potentially keeping the invariant over this fixed value would be if we decided to loosen the expectation. The thing that we get from an invariant over a fixed value is that we are allowed to say, well, this is a should or a shall. This is a error or a warning or an informational message, technically. Is the other option that we have. And so it allows for instance, if we kept the invariant and removed the fixed value, we could change this to should use UCOM, and it would flag in a validation process against an instance as a warning, right? What we are used to seeing, this kind of orange for that instance, as opposed to like a hard error. And so those are, yeah.
I kind of actually like the invariant form, just because I know we would like to standardize the unit of measure to UCOM, but I don't know. Are we fully confident that everything is going to be UCOM? This one will preclude implementers to use other systems, right?
Well, the two ways we could loosen it is using the invariant to make it a warning rather than an error,
right?
Or making it an extensible binding, which says if you've got something in UCOM, then you must use UCOM, and otherwise you could use something else. But I think almost everything that we would see that would come in alternate units would have something in UCOM. So the extensible binding doesn't quite give you that, where the invariant lets you say this is a warning. So that would be the advantage going there, is if we want to loosen this somewhat. I think if we don't want to loosen it, if we want to say it must be UCOM, then the fixed value makes sense rather than using it in a variant. But if we want to loosen it, then that brings in the other questions.
Thomas, I saw your hand go up. Or maybe it was an accident.
Can you hear me right now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
We talk about this specific environment CA dash baseline dash results dash 2, right?
Yep, this one that I'm
Yeah,
highlighting.
and the
here.
description, list description. If we go to the description as a base to talk about, shall use UCUM for coded quantity units. If we just stop here and this environment, my understanding should be under the value quantity dot unit. That's my understanding. However, if we go further to track the FHIR path, where value quantity dot system equal blah 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 and value quantity value dot exist, actually doesn't align with it. Yeah, it's a partially lie. I mean, so I'm not sure in that manner. First, I would say they think to review this environment's the FHIR path first.
So let's
And
look at that. Yeah, like, so let's look at
in
that.
line with this description, if we trust the description here, then back to my first thought, this environment should enter the value quantity dot unit instead of with this value quantity dot system.
Well, unit is just a string. So if we, so I'll work it backwards. So the invariant right now is checking two locations. It's checking system to say, and maybe I'll work from the back. So this is saying if a value quantity is supplied and there is something in that value, so if value exists, then value quantity system has to equal units of measure. And so units, we take a look at that data type real quick. So when we express quantity, we can express the actual numerical. So this would be like if we were going to say 100 milligrams. Oops, clicked too quickly. Then 100 is going to be what's in value. So value would be populated. And your unit, milligram, mg, might show up one of two ways. It could show up as unit as a string, or it could show up as unit as a code. Oftentimes we encourage unit as a code, particularly in cases where things are UCOM, because it's going to be more likely that there's going to be standardization of what's actually expressed. And you're able to actually tie it back to, through system, it actually being a UCOM code. Because if they supply MGA and you say, but the system is units of measure, the validator is going to say, that's not an actual UCOM code. That's not standard. So there is value actually to the system code combo over unit, even though there is a unit element in this data type.
Just as you just give a very good description, shall we? Sorry, first I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I apologize. Second, just as we just give a very good description, shall we say this environment should be escalated under the quantity?
So are you saying to apply it upwards?
Quantity, that's right, element.
Yeah, so that's one fix that if we decide to keep the invariant, we will have to bring up this up to, where is it? Up here.
Yep.
And so,
Value x dot column value quantity. Yep.
and so, yeah, so we're comfortable after that explanation for like why we're targeting system as like one way of constraining this kind of UCOM's expectation. It's just the location and the placement might have to go up. Are there like, so actually there's one thing that I wanted to show in making this kind of decision a little ahead of time. So we looked at the data type, like what's available for the specification from the base specification for this data type. You'll note that the base specification says if the unit is coded in UCOM and a code is provided, it should be a UCOM code. If a unit is provided in the code, blah, blah, blah. The most important thing, is that we're not seeing anything in the base specification that says inherently, if you're supplying a quantity, you have to use UCOM. And so I think it's one of those things that also might inform our decision about the strength of this invariant, should we choose to keep it.
Well,
Keep it-
that, putting
Yeah.
on my orders and observations hat on that, that's because orders and observation would really like to see them UCOM, but it's just not practical in a universal environment. There's just too many places where they don't or can't use UCOM.
And do
What
we
would
anticipate
those
that's,
be?
oh, go ahead, Elliot.
Sorry. What would those be, Noreen?
Well, just like we've had here, and we're a little bit ahead, the US lab environment is definitely not all switched to UCOM yet. You know, and getting them there is a challenge. I'm not sure what else outside of US and Canada, what the situation is, but the use of UCOM is not universally accepted yet, and the standard can't drive them there. So,
Second,
yeah. So while we highly encourage it to be UCOM, it's the same thing in V2. UCOM is highly encouraged, but not mandated.
And that was my point exactly earlier too.
Yeah. So that's why I said the decision about whether we should be fixing it to UCOM and mandating it is a separate question from how we want to express that, if that's what we want to say. I know we'd all love to say you must use UCOM, and maybe that's now possible in Canada.
well, maybe
Because-
say that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Give more descriptive than confirmative.
So Thomas, does that put you in favor of keeping the current strength or relaxing?
No,
criteria?
I would like to go with Lauren. Keep it more descriptive way than confirmative way. If there's quite a lot of I call it a legacy system does need to transform into FHIR standard format in that manner, can we see we put a very encouraging description there. So okay, we definitely advocate to utilize UCOM if it's possible in that manner, and put this confirmative way, which is invariant, to enforce the user have to comply with the settings, which is, sorry to use the word, roadblocker, to discourage, actually, eventually discourage the adoption of this FHIR standard.
Yeah. So Thomas, that might argue for keeping the invariant and removing the fixed value, but making the invariant a warning or an information, not an error.
Yes, and the prefix, and that's called the fixed value, might give a second thought.
Well, the fixed value would force it to be UCOM. So
Yeah, that's the reason why, as Will
Yeah.
Gray, from business perspective, we might not see that legacy system would like to carry the UCOM or to confirm the UCOM application here. And then why we put this a fixed value here, which is bring quite lots of
So the question for you,
see.
Thomas, do you know if Alberta lab results are all UCOM now?
Ask Randy.
No idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they weren't 10 years ago, last time I worked with Alberta Lab Systems, but things change over a decade.
One hopes.
Yeah.
I'm somewhat puzzled in that there are concepts that can't be expressed in UCOM.
Well, I think pretty much everything can be expressed in UCOM, but whether you can get the businesses and the systems to go there is another question.
And it will also force mapping if they're not there yet, if we make it
Yeah.
fixed.
And so maybe like having it as a should in the base makes sense. And then if it was gonna be a shall, like we would expect that to be something that shows up in the baseline if the expectation is like prescriptive and they will have to be changed.
Right.
Does anyone want to form this? Is there like, are there parts of this that we still want to evaluate, or should we talk about this in terms of like a motion?
Well, I think the first question is, do we want to say it must be? If we want to say it must be UCOM, then I would say we stay with the fixed value. If we want to be softer than that, then I would say use the invariant with a warning level. That's my reaction, but I don't know what it is we want to say here.
Does anyone feel that it should still stay as must be UCOM?
I'd love to be able to say that, but
I'm thinking more that keep it at the should as a warning. And then if implementers in the jurisdiction want to tighten it because they have UCOM, then they can tighten it. But if you tighten it and they don't have it, then they're stuck.
There's an extension there. Well, at least they given some alternative.
yeah, but forcing people to put their quantitative values in an extension, that strikes me as counterproductive, but
Forcing is not a good word. I agree with you.
well, if we fix it and they want to send something else that's not UCOM, that's sort of what we be doing, right?
I think the challenge is that like normally when we've had this, do we relax? Like it's because somebody in the community is coming to us and they're saying, hey, like my implementation doesn't work with this. This doesn't actually match up to how things work in reality or how things are working with legacy.
Mhm.
And we're kind of like looking at this more proactively from a design perspective, but haven't had that like member of the community that's like, nope, this doesn't work. I'm coming to you to tell you this is too strong for me at a baseline level.
Yeah, the only evidence we have is that the base spec is a should as opposed to a shall. That's the only evidence we've got right now that's real.
Great. Just like baking. Be patient. Let it, baking for a while until can be eatable. It take time.
So Thomas, is that a motion that you want to make towards, so I hear you, I've heard you kind of in advocating for relaxation to, is it a should?
Yes, actually even can go to May. Should is okay, but because always you can see the lag between the technical force or technical team here in FHIR and the actual business team has the willingness to adopt FHIR. There's always a gap there. I would say the major gap there, just like the details here. I would like to adopt FHIR, but regarding those codable elements, terminology being forced or being required, always trouble the adaptation here. So yeah, I would like to, give this.
I don't think there's any point in going as loose as May. If we want to be that loose, there's no point in saying anything.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, one of the
recall.
things you should note is this ballot cycle, there is a lab results FHIR implementation guide coming in this ballot cycle that was originally developed HL7 Europe, and OO was trying to generalize it and make it a universal spec and try to get some consistency globally around how we deal with lab results. So there is imminent work coming that could influence some of the stuff. I haven't read that spec in detail, but it's going to be in, well, we're trying to get it into the September ballot. There may be roadblocks that mean we have to push it to January. But right now, everybody's pushing hard to get it into September. So there is new guidance coming out relatively soon.
First, I don't mean that actually, Laurie. Actually, I
Yeah.
do agree with you. Should be is good. I do agree with you. And the second, I want to just share my opinion. Terminology is a loose coupled component with FHIR standard as a data model. So in that manner, terminology component and the FHIR data model doesn't line with each other, especially go through the adoption process.
So I think we heard a couple folks saying May isn't strong enough. We don't really have a ton of reason to say May. I think, I mean, I have not heard too many contentious opinions in the opposite direction other than, yeah, we would love if we could be more strong, but we don't know from a baseline perspective if we could. Does anyone want to put forward a motion so we can make a decision moving forward on whether, and I think to Lorraine's point, the first being, should this be a maintain its current expectation or be loosened?
Do we have any FHIR implementations in Canada around the lab space? Of course, an observation is broader than just lab, right?
Mhm.
That could give us some guidance in terms of what's going on in Canada, because I don't really know.
So Ontario, I believe, has a lab FHIR specification.
There's OLIS. I'm gonna just make sure we've got a quick scan of it and then we can go.
I took a look at
R41.
I took a look at the oldest one. I couldn't see any guidance there regarding UCOM, but the one I was looking at was the data out, which is a query.
Got it. And I think the one that you put in the chat Finney lab provider. Okay. I wonder if this is the same one. Let's take a look. Profiled observation value quantity, value has to be present, unit has to be present, populated with OBX.
So they don't even use the code. Or
Yeah.
at least
Just see if there's anything else at the top level.
Well, that's what would happen if we fixed it to, if we fix the code system to UCOM and people wanted to send something else, they would just skip using the code and use the string.
If we fixed it?
Yeah,
Pinned it down.
like constrained it to force it to be UCOM in the codable concept part.
it's actually going to be inconsistent if they use a different unit that's not UCOM, and then we have the system as UCOM. If we fix it, that's going to be inconsistent, right?
Yeah.
Can you send, so like I know that you can't send a code without a system. Can you send a system without a code?
You can send either without the other. Well, at least in regular coded values.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm thinking like, because I know that this only goes one direction, which is to say, if it's coded, have a system for quantity, but I don't know if you can send this. I haven't seen that. Interesting. Okay.
But I would expect that's what people would try to do if we fixed it. That's how they try to get around it.
So, unfortunately, I don't think we have a ton more clarity from looking at what we have for labs here. So I'll bring it back to like, do we have what we need to make a decision? And if so, does anyone want to propose that we do this one way or the other?
Okay, so I think I'll put together a proposal, because I think if we don't know, we should be looser rather than tighter. So I'm gonna propose that we remove the fixed value from the quantity system and add in the invariant to to say if you, I'm not gonna say it in FHIR path. Basically, this to issue a warning if you send coded units where the system is not UCOM. And we could tear that apart now that I've sort of said it.
I will second that.
We need further discussion. Is there, oops, let me actually, did I spell quantity wrong? No. Are there any folks that would want to abstain from voting on this motion? Are there any folks that would vote negative on this motion? All right, I think that puts us at, okay, keep me honest, is it 0012 or 1200?
1200.
Okay, I think it's just weird that it's the opposite of the order that we ask it, and that's what always like messes me up. But I guess that's a practicality. All right, so motion carries in terms of our making the modification and removing these two pieces. Like, does anyone have any concern about making a partial modification to the value codable concept to just bring it up in its location, similar to the like locational change that we'll be making here?
Yeah, I think it's a more natural place to put the variant. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's almost required. Do we need to vote on a motion for that? Because we have previously in the past said, like, make changes if they are just isolated to applying the location of the variant to the correct place.
I
I'm
think
not
it's
sure that
correct.
invariant is actually correct.
Correct. From a XPath perspective, or
Yeah,
so we know that results 1 is applied. Let me get to the diff in the diff. On oh, this one is applied on value codable concept. But it's giving us guff about this. And I think it wants us to remove value codable concept and just have coding system empty. Is that what you're referring to?
that looks good, although I'm not sure I agree with that. Constraint either, but it looks like it's valid syntax.
Yeah, I think we just have to, well, I'll give it a try, but I think just like some of the others, well, so it's a slightly different because it is actually applied here instead of like what we were looking at with quantity that was applied lower, which it definitely didn't like. But I think the issue
The
here is
value codable concept might not work. They just either give a simple try the value directly.
this value.coding.system.
Yep.
Okay.
That
I'll give
rather
it a try.
works because it just under the condition there's a FHIR path.
Okay, modify. I'm just gonna put as a trial, value coding. You guys can't see this because it's too small. And then I'll bring it back to the group. All right, so that one isn't a motion because actually we probably do need to figure out. Oh, you're saying to put value of type codable concept into the XPath?
Well,
Right,
that's
to the
what,
expression?
who's the writer of this sushi? He said, okay, just understood. There's a discussion there, quite a lot of discussion. And John or asked, and they said, okay, this way, identifier, whatever, the value X you want to concrete the data type. Just go that way. Value of
The way
type.
it's expressed in a constraint is different than the way it's expressed in sushi or you know, as an element name. I think it actually might need to be value dot as brackets codable concept dot whatever. So
So you're saying not this way?
you've got of type. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that was the one that Thomas
yeah.
just dropped in the chat. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll try it both ways. But I think it sounds like this one is gonna be the one that's gonna work for us. All right, we got 10 minutes and I'm hopeful we can talk about the pending motion that we had for smoking status. So on the last governance call, we had a long discussion around whether or not it made sense for us to have a smoking status profile in the base after a similar review where we're looking at the errors and also we were looking at like design and kind of duplicative nature of some of our profiling. The question came up of like, from a base, which is baseline, which is supposed to be use case agnostic, do we actually need a profile on smoking status? Given the kind of the very use case driven nature of that, and that we don't have a ton outside of like the folks that are doing this in patient summary of context behind whether or not we would need a more loose baseline profile for this particular type of or expression of the resource. And so I think that like the strongest argument that we heard was that, you know, beyond, you know, sometimes the baseline is supposed to be more relaxed, but we also have underlying principles around like putting forward profiles that are going to be highly reused, that are going to like be reused across a variety of contexts. And smoking status just didn't seem to really fit the bill. So we kind of like got it because when we started, it was part of US Core, but US Core also started with a subset of like use cases, particularly driven from the US CDI that we don't have. So we kind of like peeled back the layers of like, how did we end up with this? How did we end up with it being slightly different than what's in IPS and PSCA and what's in US Core today? And kind of had a larger discussion around like, does something that is the kind of this style actually fit in baseline at all? And like, what value do we bring from it being in baseline if we don't expect it to be like profiled further a bunch of different ways? And so I think, Elliot, you had put forward like a kind of a pending motion to say, you know, like pending our actual approach to when and how we remove the profile, to make the decision to actually remove it from our profile list. But that like we would still, from a governance and profiling perspective, have to come up with like a, do we deprecate it? Do we remove it? Is it part of a minor release? Is it part of a major release? How much do we have to communicate outwards? That kind of thing. Having now a week to think on it, do we want to modify this motion at all or refine it before we bring it? I think we've got, you know, 12 folks now on the line. So it's more than I think the 6 or 7 that we had last week.
Can I say something?
Please.
Well, may not relevant for you to your motion, and you just remind me something about that's very good experience between the PSA-A and what it works in, especially in the Alberta PSA-B, that will go through this very good collaboration. There's so much interaction, which has actually benefited both two ends. And also now with this coming URAC and dictionary projects in Canada, more times I heard that the baseline being mentioned in those projects. Maybe there's other projects as well. And I would say maybe think about to bring this as a good opportunity to have more such a collaboration interaction with other project teams. So in the manner we can see the mature of this baseline, and hope that could benefit the CA core as well. But actually that's still quite a long time ago. So quite a long time far down the road. But at least for the baseline, there's a really good opportunity there. Just stop here. Thank you.
I think that like at a philosophical level, Thomas, I definitely agree. And I think that in the past, having profiles like smoking status have allowed us to be like engaged in more of those conversations, right? Because we basically said, oh, well, we looked at that with the baseline. And so when it becomes part of a domain-based project or a use case driven project, it like ensured that those connections were in place. I think that like that's still a value that stands for like condition and procedure and patient and all the profiles that we have that are going to be like used from a variety of projects perspective. But the conversation I think that we had last week is that like smoking status is so specific, and we are having those conversations in a lot of our surrounding profiles. We have those conversations around like more generic observation profiles, but that the kind of value that we get for this one in particular just really isn't nearly as high. And it's another artifact that we have to kind of maintain and then provide rationale for why there might be differences over time as we start to get into those kind of comparisons across different projects.
Yeah, and the other question is, if we end up with a CA core smoking status, does a baseline smoking status make sense to have basically a baseline, a core, and then a use case specific like patient summary? Like, do we really need to be that deep?
My understanding in FHIR for each profile can maintain their own separate mature level. I do know if we move the whole IG as a package forward together, there might have to have, I called it maybe for this specific profile called the burden. But if we just phrase, I use word phrase, its current mature status, but still put inside an appendix maybe in the package, move forward. And might be one option. First, I would say all those previous work and those contribution or those things on this specific profile should be retained. Second, down the road, nobody knows one day might come the how to say the adaptation or willingness to utilize this smokestack might come at the horizon. Just stop here.
I think the value of like when we talk about like having this historical artifact and like there being some details in it, really the only variations that we have here, and we don't really have a rationale for why they exist, is that like for some reason in the baseline we have effective or issued, but without and here's why, or the project that like specifically requires that variation, like it doesn't hold a lot of value as a historical artifact. So
We should
go ahead, Elliot.
probably look at more use of comments or requirements elements on our profile. Let us, if you could trace it in the profile, where things came from. But that's kind of a sidetrack. Sorry.
No, but it is a learning to, I think, to bring forward.
Yeah, I think for this one, I support Elliot's original motion of at least deprecating this. I don't think it's adding much value for us right now.
Elliot, are you still putting yourself forward as a primary?
Sure.
Okay, and just to remind folks, right now, it is remove the smoking status pending agreement on approach for how we'll handle this. So like deprecation isn't explicitly mentioned, but if on the governance call, we say, yep, it should be deprecated and it's probably something that should be deprecated as part of like 1.2. I think that is the intent of having some of this like flexibility, right, Elliot? That like it will allow for us to make that decision on the minutia.
Yeah, do we deprecate it for one release and then pull it out totally? Do we, yeah.
Yeah,
What does it
and
look like?
And it makes sense to me to leave it flexible for however the governance rules decide to do it.
Okay, so you're
So,
still comfortable, Lorraine, then being a second?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there folks that feel like we still need discussion on this item? Is there anyone that, oh, I heard someone go off mute.
Sorry, Sharon, just for me to understand. So right now, we're not removing it, but we will indicate that it's deprecated so that future adopters will not use it. Is that the idea right now?
So the idea is that it would be removed from the list, like when we have the list of profiles and the implementation guide, of like active profiles, and that the decision about whether or not to update the status and keep it in the project is deprecated, and the timelines for that and like full removal, I think will be a secondary motion that we create probably at next week's governance call, but that it would no longer be considered an active profile in our future releases.
Okay. And we know that no one has adopted that, right?
We don't, but we'll find out when we deprecate it.
Someone shouts.
Well,
I think that's the whole point of deprecating something and giving people some time to react. Go ahead, Elliot.
If they're currently using it, they've got a package with it in it, and they can keep using it. Deprecating says we're no longer recommending that you need to use this, or that you should be using this.
And
And then at
then,
some point, it'll no longer show up in the package at all.
and then where they go, if they really want to keep this profile. And
They
if
use
they,
an older version of the package.
and they will have go somewhere else. And my understanding baseline, Canadian baseline should be the superset. That's a native for Canada-wide usage in that manner. Deprecation could be a little bit too far.
But taking it out of the package or deprecating it doesn't say that people can't have a smoking status profile or that there couldn't be one in CA Core. We're just not expressing constraints across that are constraints that are applying across the baseline. It doesn't say that there can't be smoking status profiles at the use case specific level.
We can go anywhere to find this equivalent smoking status in the FHIR standard, but questions here. And what's the I'm not I don't know how to say that, but actually the one of the purpose with this baseline is we try to find a one-stop store for all those applications which would like to adopt FHIR in Canada.
I don't know if I think that is maybe a mistranslation. It's not a one-stop shop. It is a starting point, which means to say that like we don't profile for everything under the sun, but we do want to profile for the things that we would expect to show up time and time again.
Yeah, but I would like to see the cumulative way to see the growth of this baseline instead of just like every. But it doesn't mean that there's no review stage and try to chop off or reshape this profile package, but that will be very, how to say, major stage and need a very serious governance call. But you know,
So
add in this might be easier, but to chop off just as a Finny asked questions, there's no really awareness if there's anyone has adopted this specific profile or not in Canada or somewhere else. I don't know. So yeah, that's the question.
So does it make sense, because we did have a few folks that dropped, to effectively like talk about deprecation and maybe shape up this motion like form, like after folks have had that discussion on the governance call next week? Or do folks want to call for the vote? It sounds like we still have a discussion.
Yeah, and we're over time, so calling for a vote over time is not really fair.
And we can post it maybe on the forum as well. Collectively some ideas as well.
All right, so I'm gonna modify this for next week. And then surrounding the topic, we're gonna have around deprecation, removals, like process. Okay. All right. I'll just say the following because it's in the one below. Perfect. Have a wonderful weekend, folks. Thanks for staying over for a few minutes. And we will, I'm sure, have a great conversation next week around removals and deprecation. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Jen.